Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be sharing with you from a non-fiction book. This one is called Last of the Giants by Jeff Campbell, and it's about megafauna, also known as giant animals, various giant creatures that lived on Earth in the ages of the past. Some went extinct thousands of years ago, others more recently. And I'm going to be reading to you from the chapter about the aurochs. And that is actually the original ancestor of today's domestic cattle. Alright, so let's jump right in. I'm also going to be showing you some pictures along the way. Alright, aurochs, the original wild bull. Extinction. The last aurochs died in 1627. The aurochs has the ironic distinction of being the first extinction that humans ever documented. The aurochs went the way of the dodo in 1627, while the dodo, history's second documented extinction, didn't go the way of itself until the 1660s. Why ironic? Because the wild aurochs, which despite the S is both the singular and plural, is the parent species for all domestic cattle, and domestic cattle are the most successful and important species on Earth. In all, nearly 1.5 billion cattle, representing perhaps 1,000 types, encircle the globe today. 1 for every 5 human beings, and without domestic cattle, civilization as we know it would not exist. Yet, the success of its well-behaved children is primarily what did the aurochs in. That's gratitude, huh? Giants of Cave Painting. And here I'm going to be showing you a reconstruction of prehistoric people painting in the Altamira cave in Spain. Aurochs have always held a special place in the human imagination. The species caught our attention early and never let go. The same can be said of many giants. Big wild animals are almost invariably the focus of prehistoric figurative rock art. We can only guess at the art's purpose. It may be ritualized hunting magic, or hunting instructions, or spiritual communication, or storytelling, or artistic expression. But our obsession with giant animals rings loud and clear. They rumbled across crowded prehistoric landscapes and defined our early existence. The aurochs, Latin name Bos primigenius, is one of 14 species depicted in France's Chauvet Cave, whose art dates to at least 32,000 to 30,000 years ago, and some say it may be 36,000 years old. This makes it the oldest cave painting in Europe and among the oldest anywhere. Aurochs are also featured in the famous cave paintings at Altamira, Spain, dating from 22,000 to 14,000 years ago, and at Lascaux, France, dating from 17,000 years ago. In Lascaux, the Great Hall of the Bulls showcases 4 aurochs, one stretching 17 feet long and among the largest animals ever depicted in cave art. Was this aurochs to scale? Twice the size of any known aurochs, it would have been equivalent to an Asian elephant. However, Caesar, the famous Roman emperor, wrote that aurochs were little smaller than elephants in size, and a 12th century account called them as big as an elephant. Could certain individuals have been that massive? Humans are notorious exaggerators, so probably not. But we don't really know because no one took a tape measure to a living aurochs when they had a chance. And that picture that you just saw a minute ago was from the Fourneau de Diable, or Devil's Furnace rock in France, the rock carvings. Indeed, even though beautiful and lifelike, ancient art only hints at the living animal. And we're now looking at Lascaux Cave. Later paintings and illustrations of aurochs aren't very accurate either. That's all we possess besides bones. So today, researchers must measure fossils, chew their pencils, and guesstimate how big the Earth's original bovine really was, rump to horn tip and hoof to withers, or the tops of the shoulder blades. What's clear is that aurochs were significantly larger than domestic cattle and squarely built, weighing up to 3,000 pounds. An adult bull likely stood 5.5 to 6.3 feet tall at the shoulders. Its body length roughly matched its height, to which was added a huge head and stupendous horns, a pair of ivory-colored, spiraled, forward-curving daggers ending in sharp black tips that could reach 3.5 feet long. In modern terms, it's like taking the original classic Volkswagen bus, chopping a few feet off the back end, replacing the rear view mirrors with swords, and there's your aurochs bull. A ton plus of rock-solid, grass-chewing meanness. No wonder they caught our attention. Female aurochs were noticeably smaller, by a foot or more all around. This gender size difference is known as sexual dimorphism, and it's a common trait among herd-living herbivores. Since even the ancients painted in color, one thing we're more certain of is their hide. Bulls were black or a rich blackish brown, and females were more reddish brown. Both genders also had a light-colored stripe running down their backs, and they had a tousled mop of shaggy, curly hair between their horns. For some reason, among the animal's many daunting attributes, this incongruous, frizzy forehead inspired the most fear in us. One 16th century hunter wrote that it makes the animal horrible to behold, a sentiment echoed by others. Another incongruity, aurochs were legendary for their unyielding nature. They weren't just big, they stared you down. They never gave in, meeting every challenge and every challenger head on. And yet, of all the mega herbivores depicted in those ancient caves, including elk, bison, red deer, elephants, rhinos, hippos, and so on, only aurochs and horses were domesticated. After the woolly mammoth and the woolly rhino went extinct, the aurochs was left as Europe's largest land mammal, and yet somehow we persuaded this powerful, unrelenting behemoth to relax and come live with us. Wild mother of 1,000 children. That ancient humans learned how to domesticate wild animals is self-evident. Anyone with a dog or cat or who rides a horse lives with the proof. How did people do it? That we can only guess. The wolf was the first wild animal to morph into an entirely new domestic species, the dog. And here you're going to see an illustration of a carving of an Assyrian dog. This doesn't mean we tamed a few individuals now and then. Even lions can be occasionally tamed. Rather, generations of tamed wolves steadily evolved to become genetically different, until each new generation was born preferring to live with people. With the wolf, this process happened very slowly, over thousands and perhaps tens of thousands of years, sometime between 30,000 and 14,000 years ago. At some point, when prehistoric humans were painting in caves, the dog joined us, perhaps sitting alertly by the artist's side. Then, 13,000 to 11,000 years ago, what's known as the Neolithic Revolution began. We domesticated the first wild grains, rye and wheat, and we domesticated goats, sheep, and pigs. With these, humans shifted for the first time from hunters to herders, from foragers to farmers, instead of living on the move, chasing our meals, and migrating with the seasons. We settled into permanent villages, stored food for the winter, and got busy with our epic work, civilization. What we needed, though, was more muscle. Goats, sheep, pigs, and dogs were great, but they wouldn't pull a plow or a cart. Who might do that? The aurochs was domesticated between 10,500 and 8,000 years ago, and humans performed this magic trick of turning aggression into agreeableness not once, but possibly 3 separate times. The first was about 10,500 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Then, we did it again in northern India about 9,500 years ago. And we possibly did it a third time in North Africa, some 9,500 to 8,000 years ago. Afterward, cattle became living tools and the engines of the agricultural revolution. They were our tractors and trucks, plowing fields and hauling the harvest. They mowed pastures, eating hard-to-digest grasses, and their manure fertilized crops. Their milk, meat, and hides fed and clothed each expanding generation of people. Cattle came to define wealth and prosperity, and they carried us on their broad shoulders into the modern age. Over the next 7,000 years, cattle were herded into every corner of the globe. As humans bred cattle for specific jobs in new habitats, their forms multiplied, becoming perhaps 1,000 breeds in all, some of which have since disappeared. And here you're seeing the Highland cow, a picture of a Highland cow in England. By contrast, aurochs evolved into 3 subspecies, and their habitat only dwindled. cattle directly competed with aurochs for the same types of grassland, and as people cleared forests and created new pastures, aurochs were driven away so cattle could thrive. Aurochs originally ranged across almost the entire temperate middle of Eurasia, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, from Great Britain south to India, and along the North African coast. Then, like water draining from a tub, with the drain itself in Central Europe, the aurochs disappeared. First from East Asia, then from India, then from the Middle East. From 1300 BC to AD 400, aurochs vanished from Great Britain, Greece, Italy, France, Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands. By 1300, it was gone from Germany, Hungary, and eastern Russia. And here you're seeing a map of Europe from 1092. As the 14th century unfolded, Poland was the only place with aurochs. Most people didn't mind. Cattle were essential to us, not aurochs. And the truth was, wild aurochs could be a real pain. But even by this late date, the extinction of the aurochs wasn't inevitable. Rather, its demise epitomized how human attitudes toward wilderness and wildness had evolved. Once there was only wilderness, and we were simply part of it. That's what we painted on cave walls. However, when we learned how to domesticate plants and animals, we learned how to create something other than wilderness, a world shaped by us, a world built for us. In the process, we became domesticated ourselves, and getting rid of wilderness, taming wildness inside and out, came to seem like our most important job. The aurochs' wild, unpredictable nature embodied precisely what humans wanted to stamp out. Don't poke the bull. So, what was it about the aurochs? Was it really the crazed, snorting monster of legend? Yes and no. Actually, aurochs didn't seem to be a problem if you left them alone. Several first-hand accounts from the early 1600s testify to this. In 1634, one person wrote, "When not provoked, they will allow a human being, or even a wild animal, easy passage." In 1602, someone who'd clearly encountered an aurochs wrote, "An aurochs is not afraid of humans and will not flee when a human being comes near. It will hardly avoid him when he approaches slowly. And if someone tries to scare it by screaming or throwing something, this will not scare it in the least. But while it stays in its place, it will actually open its mouth, widen it, and close it again quickly, as if it is making fun of the human for this attempt. When it is standing in the road or somewhere else, one must go around it, even if one is driving a carriage, since it will not move off the road by itself. When challenged, they become very hot-tempered. But if the person who has provoked it stretches out on the ground, nothing bad will happen to him, since they spare those who are stretched out, just like lions, with remarkable kindness." Whether or not the writer personally tested this theory, he paints an interesting portrait. Impassive, placid, unbothered, the aurochs feared nothing, not even us, who perhaps amused it. Having evolved to be more than a match for the nastiest predators of the Pleistocene, maybe the aurochs looked at us thinking, "Grow some claws and teeth, then we'll talk." Perhaps this is a clue to how we domesticated the aurochs. So long as we were friendly, the animal tolerated us, even displaying remarkable kindness. Many wild animals don't, no matter how nice we are. Tolerance of humans is an extremely rare trait among wild creatures. And you're seeing here a portrait of a aurochs bull from a fresco in Knossos, Crete. But we didn't leave the aurochs alone. We poked it, hunted it, and provoked it to fight. When angry, the aurochs was an unrelenting beast, and overcoming such fury became a badge of honor and a way to prove one's courage. Perhaps people felt this proved their superiority over wildness itself. This urge remains. To imagine facing an aurochs, imagine being a Spanish bullfighter, or one of those daredevils in the streets of Pamplona when the bulls are let loose to run every year. Today, Spanish bulls are considered the most direct descendant of the aurochs. It's the domestic breed that has retained more of the aurochs' wild genes and behavior, just as certain dogs are more wolf-like. These encounters are the modern versions of what people have been doing for millennia. Perhaps the earliest reference to a bullfight is in the epic poem Gilgamesh, which dates to at least 2000 BC. Gilgamesh defeats the Bull of Heaven in a mythic battle that may indicate a tradition of bullfighting already existed. Bullfights later emerged in ancient Turkey, Egypt, Crete, Italy, and Spain. Almost without question, the aurochs' signature move, the blindingly fast charge, horns down, in order to gore the enemy and toss the opponent into the air, is the one used by Spanish bulls today. And here you're seeing a picture of the aurochs as a symbol of Adad, or Hadad, an ancient Mesopotamian god of storm and rain, and this is from the Ishtar Gate in Babylon. The distinctive art of bull jumping arose in Knossos on Crete. This acrobatic act of heart-stopping bravery was immortalized in Minoan art. And here you're seeing a picture of that from a fresco in Knossos. The Romans also used aurochs in their arena battles and considered hunting aurochs a male rite of passage. As Julius Caesar wrote in 53 BC, "They kill aurochs after they have caught them in pitfalls. The young men season themselves to do this work, and those that have killed the most are greatly praised, after the horns have been displayed in public as evidence." And here you're going to see the hunting horn of Sigismund III of Poland, made out of an aurochs horn. Hunting aurochs almost didn't seem worth it if you didn't get one of these talismans or trophies. The three treasured items were the horn, the heart bone, and the hairy forelock. Aurochs' horns were intricately carved, gilded with silver and gold, and used as drinking vessels or sounding horns. The heart bone is a cross-shaped piece of cartilage that exists in the heart of all bovines. The forelock was the most coveted prize of all, at least among Polish hunters in the 15th and 16th centuries. Woven into belts, they were considered valuable gifts that supposedly aided childbirth. Most gruesome of all, the forelock was taken while the aurochs was injured, but still alive. As a hunter wrote in 1557, it was torn off dying aurochs after the skin has been cut loose in a circle. The only trouble? By 1557, only about 40 aurochs were left alive to hunt. Last stand in Poland's great wilderness. Prehistoric Europe was mostly a dense, dark, impenetrable forest, broken up by marshy patches and stubby grasslands like a badly shaven beard. Here you're seeing a modern picture of the Hermanowa forest in Poland. In the Middle Ages, people experienced it as a terrible, great wilderness that pretty much defined everything they hated about the wild. It was ugly, unruly, dangerous, a barrier to travel, and antithetical to human society. Century after century, people hacked away at this forest, replacing it with fields, roads, and cities. By 1300, only a few scraps had escaped the razor outside Warsaw in central Poland. This is where the aurochs made its last stand, in the forests of Wiskitki and Yaktoro. By the 14th century, so few aurochs were left that the monarchy of Poland decreed that henceforth hunting aurochs was reserved for royalty. Oh, and you're now seeing the Wiskitki commune coat of arms, which shows an aurochs. Further, in the early 1400s, a well-organized game-keeping service and the entire village of Yaktoro were founded expressly to care for the aurochs. The gamekeepers were 16 hunters whose job was to protect the aurochs from poachers, feed the aurochs hay in winter, count them, and keep the animals from straying outside the forest. In exchange, game wardens were exempt from taxes, equipped with horses and weapons, and given farmland. It was a cushy, privileged job, and it meant the aurochs was the first wild animal to be protected in the wild. Yet these good intentions weren't shared by everyone. Evidence of the aurochs' last days is chronicled in a series of royal inspection reports from the late 1500s and early 1600s. And here you're seeing a picture of an aurochs from a 1600s manuscript. In bureaucratic language, they document the abuse of power, petty corruption, and everyday self-interest that allowed the aurochs to perish at the hands of the very people who'd been asked to preserve the species. Apparently, villagers engaged in numerous forbidden or outlawed activities. They cut trees for lumber, grazed their cattle, and allowed pigs to forage for acorns in the protected forest. This upset the aurochs' habitat and took the aurochs' food. In 1564, the first inspection report said, "Much of these forests has already been destroyed by the people. They ride violently and do not let themselves be caught. In addition to this, the herds of cattle of the nobility and the farmers are found in these forests, which graze there, as a result of which, according to the hunters, the aurochs do not breed well, the calves die, and few survive the winter. In 1564, 38 aurochs were counted. By 1599, 24. However, the gamekeepers multiplied, dividing their spoils and territory to the point that they likely outnumbered the aurochs. Most of all, they were obviously turning a blind eye to illegal shenanigans, perhaps because they were profiting themselves. The 1599 report stated bluntly that the gamekeepers do not honor their obligations. One report pleaded, "We demand that the inhabitants do not herd cattle and do not mow grass for their own use. This village was not established in giving liberties so much for their cattle as for the aurochs and their welfare. The Tauros, local leader, has to ensure that our forests where the aurochs live are not destroyed by said subjects, so that the aurochs may retain its former habitat." If the Polish monarchy was listening, its response was not recorded. In 1602, only 4 aurochs remained. At the time, gamekeepers claimed a disease caught from domestic cattle killed the rest. That can happen, but this might have been an excuse to hide illicit poaching and their own negligence. In 1620, the last bull died, leaving only a single aurochs cow, who died in 1627. A few captive aurochs in zoos may have outlived their wild brethren, but none survived much longer. What the heck? Rebreeding aurochs, rewilding Europe. A world with cattle but no aurochs is like a world with dogs but no wolves. Almost since the aurochs went extinct, people have wanted the species back. Few things exemplify the transformation of human attitudes toward wilderness in modern times than efforts to restore this great icon. Today, the dream of recreating the aurochs is the cornerstone of a movement to rewild Europe. Of course, rewilding involves more than one species, and it's impossible to remake an entire continent. Instead, conservationists imagine restoring in about a dozen places something closer to the original diversity of plants and animals that once defined Europe's long-lost great wilderness. To achieve this, wild cattle are considered a keystone species, since the aurochs' presence and impact helped shape the very character of Europe's ancient wilderness. In the 1800s, people first proposed carefully cross-breeding domestic cattle species in order to recreate the aurochs. Called back-breeding, this method amounts to rewinding domestication. Instead of selectively breeding aurochs to create a smaller, gentler, human-loving cow, you selectively breed domestic cows to tease out their enduring wild genes and trait by trait reconstruct a single animal, the bigger, wilder original. This was first attempted in the 1920s and 1930s by 2 German brothers, Heinz and Lutz Heck. Their father ran the Berlin Zoo, so they had access to lots of cattle breeds. They mixed and matched types until, in short order, they came up with an animal they thought successfully resembled the extinct aurochs, which you're about to see here. Not quite. The Hecks congratulated themselves too quickly. No one today regards Heck cattle as reborn aurochs, and the Hecks' work is considered sloppy, incomplete, and inaccurate. However, they showed that backbreeding could work, and Heck cattle have proven to be survivors. Over 600 still live in Dutch, German, and French nature preserves. In 2008, the Taurus Foundation decided to try again as one among several efforts within the Rewilding Europe program. Today, the Tauros program is currently in the process of backbreeding cattle to create a brand new species of wild animal. And actually, since this book was published, they have actually succeeded. You're seeing here a picture of the Taurus Foundation release in the Velebit Mountains of Croatia in August 2020, just last month. They released the first ones. As the foundation's director, Ronald Goderi, wrote, "The end result will look like an aurochs, live like an aurochs, behave, mate, eat, defecate, and eventually die like an aurochs." In other words, by doing all these things, this animal will perform the same ecological function in the wild as the aurochs once did, even though this animal won't actually be an aurochs. Unlike a clone, it won't be an exact copy, so this animal will be given a new name, Tauros, which is the Greek word for bull. Further, once the Tauros is released into the wild, hopefully by the year 2030, and as you can see, they are 10 years ahead of schedule, that's interesting, scientists will stop meddling with its genes and allow natural selection and evolution to shape the animal. You're seeing here some pictures of the Tauros again in the Velebit Mountains. And you're also going to see next a picture from the Taurus Foundation website of the keystone species and how it fits in its habitat. As this new old version of cattle ranges across Europe, the Tauros will be left free to adapt as they must to survive in our 21st century version of wilderness, just as the original aurochs once adapted to life in the Pleistocene. If that happens, the final irony for the aurochs will be this: its children will have rebirthed the parent. For the first time in history, domestic animals will be used to recreate a wild one, and this lost species can come down from those prehistoric cave walls and stand tall in the landscape once again. I hope you enjoyed learning about the aurochs, and I hope that you will join us again next week for Teen Story Share. Bye, have a good weekend.